work, but known throughout the state and the country for the tireless effort that he does to represent people, to allow them to come home and be productive citizens. And so please help me in welcoming Keith Watley.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Sean, for having me. I'm happy to be here. This is it's an important time in our state's history. Great opportunities, but a number of significant challenges. My office is a nonprofit down here on 4th Street, and what I say we do is we help people serving life sentences figure out how they got to prison and how to get out. And that can be a long process. The focus, although it seems like it, is not really just on the parole board. We help people change their lives, and along the way, the parole board finds they're suitable for release. And we've had a lot of success. We're up to 140 of our clients have been released from life sentences. And thank you. So every year, those people stay out of prison. Every year, we save the state $8.5 million every year. And none of our clients have been back to prison. That's because they changed their lives. So those are the numbers. You're going to hear from Yanira and Troy and Michael shortly, and they'll give you sort of the real life experience of that process and what it looks like, what success looks like, frankly. But I want to talk a little bit about Senate Bills 260, 261, and what it means for the work that we do and the people who are affected by it. Senate Bill 260 was passed in 2013, and it really was California's effort to implement the U.S. Supreme Court's decisions, recognizing that we have made huge mistakes in treating kids like adults, and we actually have to treat them like kids, recognize that there are some significant differences in brain development, their ability to resist impulses, resist peer pressure, their inability to control their difficult environments, and most importantly, their distinct ability to change, their capacity for change, had been completely neglected, forgotten about. David talked about, he mentioned Proposition 21 back in 2000. In a lot of ways, that was that built off this mythological super predator we started hearing about in the mid-90s. California's version sent thousands of kids to adult prison for the rest of their lives unless they could figure out how they got there. And even then, they had the possibility to be released. So with Senate Bill 260, it recognized we actually have to give those kids an opportunity to come home. That meant that people whose crimes were committed before they turned 18 and got a long sentence, doesn't have to be a life sentence. Most of them are life sentences with the possibility of parole, but it included people who had 50, 60, 80, 100, 200 years. They all of a sudden are now eligible for parole consideration hearings. So it gets kind of complicated to figure out when they are eligible for these hearings, but they either are eligible after 15 years or 20 years or 25 years, depending on the nature of their original sentence. And so that means for the first time they're dealing with the parole consideration process in the parole board. 261 was passed in 2015, and it raised that age to, instead of before 18, to before 23. People who had not yet turned 23 at the time of their crimes and got lengthy sentences, they're eligible for special parole consideration. Again, some of these are people I've had people with 5 life sentences, consecutive life sentences, who became eligible for parole overnight and then had an opportunity to go appear for the parole consideration. And so both of these changes represented tremendous hope for people who had lost hope. I mean, almost without exception, people who get hit with that much time at age 16 or 15 or 14 lose any hope of ever going home. But at the same time, the challenges are significant because what we're finding is, the process says that there are new rules for considering young people who are now not as young anymore, but who are going to parole hearings for these special youthful offender parole hearings. It says they should consider the fact they were young and recognize that they've changed over time. But most of the hearing is exactly the same. It's still a 2 to 4 hour or 6 hour proceeding, and all the important questions that the board thinks are important, at least, everyone has to answer to the board's satisfaction. If you have recent disciplinary problems or you haven't participated in enough programs within the prison, they will find you unsuitable for parole. If they deny you parole today, they will set your next hearing up to 15 years later. I met a guy last week who went to his very first parole hearing under SB 260 and got denied parole for 15 years. We'll see you again in 15 years. Hopefully you'll figure it out between now and then. So I mentioned that the challenge is that about half of the people eligible under these new laws, at least under SB 260, are housed at level 4 prisons. The parole grant overall in all prisons right now is between 20 and 25%, which is very low, but it's a lot better than it used to be. When I first started, it was about 1%, and that was about 18 years ago. But so while it's 20 to 25% for most lifers going to the parole board, for youthful offenders going from level 4 prisons, it's 3%. 3% chance. Now, the Supreme Court said that they have to have a meaningful opportunity for release. But in California, we send them to level 4 prisons where there is no meaningful opportunity for release for anyone. So that it's almost 3% is actually exceptional. At some institutions, some of the level 4s, it's as low as 1%. There are some level 4 prisons that haven't had a parole grant in the 18 years I've been doing this, not one. So the challenge is to make sure that there are realistic opportunities for these folks to have access to programs. There aren't many of them at the higher security level prisons. There are a lot of arbitrary classification decisions that keep them at higher level institutions and limit their access to programs. And some of these places are so remote that there aren't a lot of volunteers willing to travel out to the desert and some remote places to offer some programs. So there are plenty of opportunity for changes to make these things better and better accessible. However, I will say that it's these, the success stories that really make it, and it's always been the case for me, that make it worth doing what we do. When you see someone who gets a parole hearing that he or she was never going to have before and be found suitable, decades earlier than they ever would have gone home. People are going to the parole board who never would have gone to any parole board. To see them reunited with their families after 20 or 30 years, it's well worth the effort that we're putting forward. But we do have to understand that this hope can be instantly dashed when you get a 15-year denial because you weren't prepared, because you didn't know how to prepare, because you didn't have support to be successful. And so, and the reason I mention those things is because there's a great opportunity. I think there have been almost 2,000 of these youthful offender parole hearings held so far. I think about, several hundred have actually resulted in parole grants overall. And that's significant. But the parole grant rates at some of these higher institutions, higher level prisons is still a challenge. There are other groups that are affected by some of these new laws, like they have this elderly parole consideration process, which has resulted in quite a few people being released because they recognize, well, people who are in their 60s and 70s aren't likely to present a risk of violence. So we need to act like that and stop wasting money on them. So these are a couple of the things that have presented opportunities, and I look forward to talking more about what the challenges and maybe some of the other opportunities are. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. And just for some, level 4 is the highest level security at a state prison. And part of the issue is because it's that high level security, they don't offer hardly any programs. So you have to have completed programs, but they have you in a yard that doesn't have programs. And then, of course, who suffers from that is the person trying to get a grant of parole. Our next 3 speakers have all been sentenced to life in prison. They're all home, all successful, all doing wonderful, all incredible examples, and can teach us a lot, and are ultimately the experts in this discussion. Yanira Aguirre, who is at the Options Recovery Services. I have somebody I was working with and saw this. He was supposed to come today. She's like, hey, I know Yanira. And so who's been doing some incredible work in Options Recovery Services, which works with many people who come home having been given life sentences, and provides housing and counseling and other services. So please welcome Yanira Aguirre.
Thank you, David and Sean, for having me. A little bit about myself. My story really started when I was 12 years old. I found out that my father was cheating on my mother, and I told my mother about it, so it led to a divorce. And I did not know how to take it. I really personalized it. And instead of me gravitating to after-school programs or something to do with the community base, I got involved in selling drugs and the gang lifestyle. At the age of 18, I ended up getting sentenced to 3 life sentences for murder and for selling of drugs. In prison, I was young, I was scared, and I was a knucklehead, if you will. I never thought I would see the daylight again, ever. 3 life sentences at 18, there was no hope for me. So I basically ran around and did whatever I wanted to do. 115s, I had them sky high. My points kept growing and growing. I didn't see hope. Then one day I decided I want something better for myself. And it started with education. I got involved in college courses, and I realized that I was smart. I was starting getting A's. So I started really applying myself. I wanted change. I wanted to do something with my life. I got involved with programs that the prison allowed to come in, which was very hard. It took a lot of dedication because the staff sometimes would not let us go to the programs because of the unlocks, or who do you think you are trying to become somebody? You're nobody. You're never going to get home. And I was like, no, that's a stigma and I'm going to break it. So I've always had a very outgoing personality, and I was like, nope, I'm going to do this. So I decided to, like I said, continue my education. I got involved in what is called an offender mentor program. And what that is a program that comes in and certifies inmates to become drug and alcohol counselors. The prison was kind of leery about it because a lot of us were lifers. However, majority of them is success stories now. They're out, they're in the communities, and they're working. I never thought I was going to go home. Like I said, 3 life sentences. However, I wasn't going to give up. Even if I went to the board and did not get a date, I was still going to do what I was doing. I realized I took a life. I realized the ripple effect I did to my community and to that family that I could never give back. My way of making amends is by showing that I could become a better individual and helping other people, empowering women as well, and giving them a second chance and showing them that anything is possible as long as you believe in yourself and somebody gives you a second chance. There's a lot of laws out there that do keep people in prison, and I do believe some people should stay in prison. Not everybody should be out. Sometimes you get chances after chances after chances, and when do you get it? However, for those of us that do change, that do rehabilitate ourselves, that do give the effort, there's no going back. Something happens in your mind. You get that insight. You realize what you've done. You really grow. You work on yourself. In becoming a drug and alcohol counselor, I did what is called a parallel effect, and that is really looking deep inside within myself and all the damage I had done that I had never even thought of. Today, I work in Options Recovery Service. I am a women's counselor, and like I said, I believe in empowering women and giving them hope and rebuilding them. There's no such thing as, that's it, you're just a drug addict. No. As long as you work your recovery and do what you got to do, there is hope. There is, you could get a job, believe in yourself. And that's basically my story.
Thank you, Yanira.
Thank you.
Troy Williams is our next presenter, and Troy, who is a media expert, and he really transformed San Quentin Prison in terms of television show and the media available there. He's a columnist with the Oakland Post. Has a movie out, has a film that premiered recently, and I was out of town. I couldn't make it, I'm sorry. I got to get my hands on it, I'm told, though. But has a film that recently premiered, is doing, if you read his bio, he's involved in everything, and to talk about his experience and the work he's doing now. Please help me welcome Troy Williams.
You know, the first thing I want to do is really thank Keith Law and Uncommon Law. I wouldn't be home if it wasn't for him and what Uncommon Law did. Keith does a lot for a lot of people, and seldom does he often ask people for help in return. And so I just want to put that out there. If there's anything people can do to assist Uncommon Law, do so. Because to have someone believe in you when the world has given up on you, it means a lot. So I've been home about 18 months, and I spent 18 years of a life sentence, and that means that not knowing when or if you'll ever come home. It was year after year after year, my daughter would ask me from the age of 8 years old, "Daddy, when you coming home?" And I never had an answer for her. And at the same time, you know, I have to always pay respect to the harm that I did, not only to my children, but to the victims of my crime as well. Since I've been home, as David said, you know, I started my media production company up, so I'm doing film work. I'm working for the Inside Prison Project. I'm training the trainers that go inside the prisons to do the work. I'm working with youth. There's a lot that people like us have to offer to the community. So it's not just about us coming home and staying out of trouble. It's saying that I'm home and there's a level of expertise that I have that nobody else in this state has. I don't care how many years you spent in school studying the criminal justice system. Until you spent 20 years or better inside one, you don't know more than us about the system. And I say that as humbly as I possibly can. My first time going to the parole board, I walked in, I was shackled. I sat down, they sat me down at the table, and you know, after all the little formalities that they go through, they asked me, "So tell me what happened." And it was that quiet. I'm like, where do I start? What do I say? How do I talk? I don't know where to start, right? I didn't even know how to fully take responsibility for what I did, because you don't talk about your crime on the yard. You don't talk about the things that you do. In fact, some of the prisons that I've been at, it felt like every time my cell door opened, I was walking into Baghdad at the height of the war. And so I'm living in this, I'm already traumatized when I get to prison, because that trauma is what led me to prison in the first place. And then I get there in this really hyper-vigilant battle zone, and I'm expected to change without any tools or resources to do so. That's very difficult. It's very difficult to walk the streets of Baghdad and not feel like you need a weapon. So I really want to point that out, that there's a lot of men inside who want to change, and I was one of them, and I just didn't have the tool set. And at the same time, there's a lot of stigma that media puts on people inside that is just not true. For every one incident that people hear about out here in the community, there's probably about 50 that a given set of peacekeepers run around the prison putting out fires, right? And trying to keep the peace inside, right? So, you know, I've basically been one of those men inside who, you know, sat at the United Nations roundtable with every, you know, different force inside of a prison system trying to negotiate some of that. Marvin Munch being in the audience, one of my brothers on the inside. In 2006, there was a big melee riot at San Quentin State Prison where men were actually medevaced outside the prison. Big riot happened. And so the older guys got together, and we were like, we didn't want San Quentin to turn back to the San Quentin of old. And so we got together and formed the Day of Peace Committee. We raised money and served over 1,500 men on the yard, Subway sandwiches, and had music, and just had a nice, peaceful day inside the prison system. A lot of times, officials don't want the public to see that because the public is supposed to be tough on crime, and the public is not supposed to see people inside having the appearance as though they're having a good time. But I ask people this question: who do you want coming home, right? You want the big, badass, angry dude, Big Bone, the gangbanger, who, was holding gun to people's head and robbing them coming home? Or do you want Troy Williams, the aspiring filmmaker and, youth advocate at home in the community working with our kids? Because one of us is coming home, right? And society has to figure out which one they want. And I think society is making that decision, has made that decision. I don't necessarily fit in the categories of the new laws that change. My cases have always been pretty violent, but I do fit the new opportunities. If it wasn't for California going broke and the people in California realizing we need to make a change, like we're spending more money on prisons than we are, on our school system, then they would have never saw fit to let me go because my record dictates that I'm someone who would get out according to, them, who would get out and just be, a detriment, diminish to society, so to speak. And what we lifers are proving coming home is just the opposite. I've watched men inside the prison system stop somebody from losing their life on the telephone from inside the prison system. And so the public never hears about this. The public never hears about the good things that happen inside of the system. And that's a shame, right? Because there's the stigma about who we are and what we can offer to society. And society is left without the benefit of decades of experience. I had to answer for myself, how did I go from being this kid who literally has so much reverence for life that I wouldn't step on an ant? I would not step on an ant, literally, I would not step on an ant, to being a gun-toting, gang-banging felon. How did I make that transition? And even more so, how did I make the transition back? Right? I think that's a knowledge base that our community needs, and that would do a lot to help change our community if we utilize the resources. We also need people in the corporate world to realize the gift that men have to offer, right? So when people are coming home and I'm trying to do the right thing and I go to your corporate office and you tell me no because you have a criminal record, well, Pookie and Ray Ray on the block always got the door open. And when it comes time for somebody having to eat and don't have the wherewithal, the fortitude to stay on that correct journey, they gonna backslide into what led them there in the first place, which means somebody is gonna get hurt, which means public safety is affected, right? And so I think we really as a society have to think a lot differently about what public safety means and who the men are that's coming home and how we can contribute. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Our last presenter this evening, Michael Mendoza, and I've known Michael for a little while since he's been home, and been calling my friend, and I try to beat him at bowling every now and then. Like Yadira and Troy, Michael has done a lot since coming home. He's a full-time student at San Francisco State University. Soon will earn his BA. He is currently working at the Center for Criminal and Juvenile Justice, the CJCJ in San Francisco, working with young people on probation. And he's a member of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, ARC, formed and founded in Los Angeles by Hollywood producer Scott Budnick, but has grown throughout the state of California. and how I know Michael is through ARC, and he has been up to the Capitol countless times now, advocating for many of these laws that we've heard about and for more. We were talking about some of the most significant ones, but there are many other laws that have been passed, and Michael has sat with several legislators and talked about his story and advocating for change in the system. So our last presenter of the evening, please help me welcome Michael Mendoza.
Thank you, David. First, I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here to share my story with the rest of these men and women. I really appreciate the fact that all of you are here. Shows that you care about the subject. So, a little bit about my backstory. I grew up in Southern California. I'm Mexican American. And at a really young age, I made really terrible decisions. I joined a gang at the age of 13. And with that came more bad decisions. When I was 15 years old, I participated in a gang-related murder. There was about 4 of us all together who committed this very horrible crime. And we were all under the age of 18. So at 15, I was tried as an adult, given a 15 to life sentence, and for the last 17 years grew up in prison. And as we've already heard, it wasn't an easy thing to do to grow up in prison. There are a lot of obstacles. The environment is just very violent and stressful, so it takes a toll on you mentally and physically. However, throughout the time, growing up in level 4 prisons, things change. With the help of family, with the help of the few supporters that you do have left, who hold you accountable. And I think for me, that's what was most important from the support group that I received was accountability. Because with that accountability came a self-reflection, digging within inside of myself and realizing that the choices I made were very, very immature, were very irresponsible, and affected so many people. So, through the education, through family support, I was able to work my way down from level 4s to a level 3 and then eventually to a level 2. And around that time, SB 260, which my dear friend Keith Wally already spoke about, came into pass. So I just want to use an example of how important this bill was, not only for me, but thousands of other men and women. My first hearing was in 2010, before SB 260. And when I went to this hearing, at the mention of my age, at the age of 15, the board members would use that as an excuse, would say that your age at the time of the crime is really not relevant. We can't consider that as a factor. And I remember talking about my age, talking about peer pressure, talking about the lack of judgment. To the board at that time, they did not consider those as mitigating factors, and that was before SB 260. Now with SB 260, 3 years later, I was able to talk about those things, not as excuses, but as factors as to what may have influenced my decisions at that time. The main thing for me was to show maturity, to show that I was no longer that 15-year-old boy who made irrational, impulsive, and immature decisions. Instead, showing them that I was now an adult who was able to think rationally, who has proven through education, through lack of disciplinary record, that I was somebody ready to parole. So being able to have that opportunity to parole now, 2 years ago, I've just had this strong passion now to get more involved with the community. As David said, I'm involved with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition on the policy side. I've fallen in love with policy. I mean, policy gave me hope. Policy brought me home. And so just being able to get involved with policy has been really big. But at the same time, I think it's also very important to help our kids out today, which is what I do at the Center on Juvenile Criminal Justice. Just being able to have that face-to-face communication and interaction with what our kids are struggling with today, I think is very important. And events such as this, I mean, I'm studying a class right now, Critical Social Thought, and it's based on Michael Foucault. And I think it's important because in the 70s, he was talking about how it's so important to involve those who have been in the incarceration system in the discussion. And we haven't been really seeing that until now. Now are they involving those who have been incarcerated in very important topics that I think can provide very important feedback. So that's something I'm very grateful for and seeing today. And just looking forward to building those bridges. Sean mentioned that the most important thing that we can do in building a bridge, I believe, is on accountability. It's not just love, it's not just being supportive, but it's holding our men and women accountable inside the walls because they need that accountability. They need to know that there is a responsibility that they need to look into and take accountability for and say, hey, you know what, with this accountability, I can come back into society and be a better citizen for society. So it's going to be through accountability, and thank you.
All right, it is that time. So first, let me say thank you to each and every one of the panelists. Let's give the entire panel a big round of applause. I think the knowledge, the information, the wisdom, the passion that you heard from this group tonight is incredible. Again, we just want to thank Sean and her hard work. She worked tirelessly to put this all together. Let's give her another round of applause. So we're going to do question and answer. A couple things I just need to say is, one, if you have a question, because this is being filmed by KTOP, I know we're in a room, you can just get up and yell and we probably hear you, but we want the viewers at home to hear you as well. So we do want you to come to the mic to ask your question. Secondly, I just want to say, because there's this incredibly important event, very deep event that I need to run to, that's going on. See, some of you all know what I'm talking about. That if there happens to be a question for me, if somebody could just raise that now-ish, before I turn it over to Sean to facilitate the meeting. Any quick questions of anything I had to say in the beginning? You probably have forgotten it by now, everything I said, because of the incredible presentations. So appreciate that. And yes, sir.
Up here. Yeah, don't be shy.
Sean's gonna make you.
People like wait until the first. Come on up. Are you okay? Yeah. Okay. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Do other people want to ask questions? Nobody can have any.
And in addition to of me, if you have questions for the panel, please just, if you can begin to get in line. Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate on your involvement with young people? Elaborate on your involvement with young people. And let me give you a little background. In 1968, we had a discussion group with Leroy Looper, who was a member of the Attica, and a pre-activity advisor governor. We had a member group. We had the American Friends Service Committee, mental health consultant to all the 6 state prisons, 27,000 inmates, and we had Friends Outside, founder of our discussion group. We thought 27,000 inmates was too many, and within that group and the industrial trades of the Carpenters Union and others. We went into San Quentin for about 9 months until the warden said we were not part of the acceptable group, what have you, for pre-release counseling for the industrial trade inmates. Could you please elaborate, as well as some of you have got the handout, the Council on the Mentally Ill Offenders of California, others in Comio, meets next week in Sacramento on Thursday and Friday. I urge you to get the handout, visit by telephone or show up. We need to have people who are concerned about the whole person and not just the history and activity, your policy, and your activity. As well as one last thing, on May 5th, the new Secretary of the Department of Corrections met with the so-called advisory body for stakeholders in Sacramento, and he claims that he's going to have, Mr. Eric Johnson and others, he's going to have 14 new rehab programs in 14 prisons that up to this time have not had them. What that means, I don't know. Budget issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it looks like the new director of parole is somebody who's on the same wavelength as the governor, same wavelength as the new secretary. So hopefully the parole board will be more responsive. My name is Joe Bertansky. Can you please
Yes, sir.
help
First of all,
yourself with any?
Thank you very much. So a couple of quick things. One is, I'll just say, I used to carry around this article. It was, I think, the cover of San Francisco Chronicle about Reagan's pronouncement of the prison population being far too big in California, right? That was, I think it was not even 50,000, right? It is obviously, it's tripled, quadrupled since then. So around young people, what I'll say is I personally have had the privilege over the last several years of working with several organizations in the city of Oakland, which I'll come back to, but separately, I'm also a federal court monitor in Illinois over the juvenile justice, a consent decree over the juvenile justice system there, and I have the opportunity to go there and meet with young people and make sure that they are getting paroled. And the work that we've been able to do there is the numbers, I won't quote now, have been quite astronomical in terms of the number of youth getting paroled from the juvenile state system there. But in Oakland, I'll just, of all the things that I had the opportunity to do, this Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which is based in Los Angeles, is opening up a Sacramento office, not just for the policy, but also direct services in a few weeks. And we have a core, incredible group of young men here and women in Oakland, and we'll be opening up an Oakland office soon. But the city of Oakland has, the voters approved Measure Y for 10 years and recently reapproved another 10 years under something called Measure Z, which gives about $7.7 million a year to violence prevention activities. And many of those organizations who are recipients of those funds, community-based organizations, I have the pleasure of working with. And so the Mentoring Center in Oakland, Oakland, California Youth Outreach, Civic Corps, Youth Radio, Youth Employment Partnership, these are organizations that do incredible work with young people on probation, young people who are so-called at risk. And so I think that those organizations that I have the privilege of working with pretty closely do some remarkable work. And so when we're talking about young people, the funds that are released from the city because of the wonderful voters of Oakland who've passed those measures that go to these community-based organizations that reach these young people that we so desperately need to get additional resources to. And so I won't go on and on as I would like to, but that's some of the work. And assuming I'm going to transition it to Ms. Sean Rowland to begin, but please, the next question.
Hello, Troy already introduced me. My name is Marvin. I just got out of prison about 60 days ago after serving 41 years on a 7-to-life sentence. I went to the board 22 times, and Arnold Schwarzenegger took my first parole date, and Governor Brown let me go. I was 18 years old. I was about 11, maybe 12 days past my 18th birthday when I went to jail and eventually was convicted and sent to San Quentin. While at San Quentin, I became a member of the Prisoners Union, which imploded shortly after that, and we took that platform and formed San Quentin's Men's Advisory Council, which advocated for prisoners' rights from the early 70s on. And I chaired that for close to 22 years. And so when he talks about what happened inside, and when I come to these things, I'm speaking to you today with the pleas of people still inside echoing in my ear. I promised them that I would get myself onto a running start and try and inform these discussions. One of the things that made me come here today was this 260 discussion. What's to be said about the law and the books and what's done with it as application are two different things. And having just been released and having been through the process, I had the misfortune of going to the board as both a youthful offender and an elderly parole candidate when I was released. What the board has done and what's happening in Sacramento is you have a board directive now that says, due to a ruling by Judge Klein in the First Appellate District in the case of Ray Butler, the state signed a stipulated agreement saying that they will begin setting primary terms for every indeterminate prisoner in the system, as was intended by Ray Rodriguez back in 1975. They immediately came out with a directive that said, the law says that we are not to consider the matrix when we have a youthful offender or an elderly offender. If they're found suitable, we're supposed to just release them without making them do whatever extra time the matrix says they owe. So that's now turned into, if you are an elderly parole candidate or a youthful offender candidate, they are not setting your parole term at your hearing if you're found suitable or if you're found unsuitable. So if you get found suitable and the governor takes your date, you cannot go to court and say, I'm way over my term, because there was not a term set. So there are these little things that I promised I would bring and inform the conversations with. Realignment skewed the recidivism numbers. These recidivists that were going back to prison and that CDCR is now saying, well, look, our programs are working. We don't have the number of recidivists that are coming back. Well, they're going to the county jails. And this discussion is going to go forward about the county jails here very soon. Right, so I just wanted to say that what's happening up here is very important. I never thought I was going to be out. I thought I was going to die in prison. And people with long-term incarceration inside, they kind of look at parole like Christians look at heaven. They just got to have faith it's there. And what's happening with Troy today and Michael and Mr. Gary is very important. And I wanted to thank you personally. But I was just wondering if the people that are working on the 260 at the parole board, do you know about the Butler effect and what's happening with 260 and 261?
Well, we definitely are aware. I've seen that in many hearings. There's some new legislation that the parole board believes has trumped the Butler agreement. It gets a little technical, the way that agreement works out and what it means to set a term, but basically has long been a requirement that the parole board tell someone how much time in prison matches the severity of their crime. But for about the last 40 years, the board has not done that. And the board agreed in this Butler case to start doing that. And then they promptly started ignoring it with other measures that they thought were more important and made that irrelevant how much time matches the severity of the crime. But we're very much aware of that problem. It's not clear. Well, frankly, there are not a lot of resources to litigate some of the issues that need to be litigated regarding parole in general, SB 260 to 261. There's a lot of work to be done, and there aren't a whole lot of organizations or individuals willing to provide the resources to get it done.
Thank you all for incredible presentations and for the wonderful work you're doing. I'm a professor, recently retired from the School of Public Health, where we view criminal justice as a public health issue, and I retired early to be able to do more community work. I would just like to share 3 points that different ones of you have touched on or that I think fall within your area of interest in the form of one young man that I've been trying to help without much success recently. This young man asked to be sent to San Quentin when he had to go to prison so he could be near his family, because he desperately wanted to be there for ill family members and be connected. He was sent instead to Tehachapi, which I couldn't even pronounce till recently. No way that anyone in the family could get there to see him, no public transportation. And then he was put in solitary confinement for his safety because he's a gay man. Well, this guy looks like he's on World Wrestling Entertainment or whatever it is. He's very strong. He can protect himself, but he did not want to be in solitary, and they didn't let him out. Finally, he was able, to get released, thanks to some of the work you've all done with the sentence reduction and another reduction, all kinds of plans, job lined up, everything together. But he was told you have to go to a halfway house for the first few months. He was totally willing, excited about doing it, wanted to stay, off drugs and everything else. And then he gets there and they say, oh no, there's a long wait. He's back in the drug house where he got in trouble in the first place, living in the laundry room with the door locked, trying not to get in trouble. I have taken in four such men, and we literally don't have room for this guy, but there's got to be a way to follow up on our promises to prisoners. You all know that I'm talking to the converted, but I did want to just personalize it in the form of my friend. Thank you.
Contact me later.
It's-
We'll talk.
I'm not sure if I understood what you were asking.
Yeah, thank you. My question was, what's the recourse when somebody is sent to a prison far away from where they live so that no family contact can happen, or when they're put in solitary for their protection when they don't need protection and definitely don't want solitary, and finally when they're told to go to a halfway house and that it's all set up, get out, there is no room for them, and they have no place to stay and go back to where they got in trouble. So I don't know what the recourse is. It sounds like you might have.
Well, there's an in-prison part and the out-of-prison part. Out of the prison part, I can talk to you about. The in-prison
Okay.
part, I have no idea.
I'll say that there are some efforts underway to get the state to reconsider some of these, what a lot of us think are arbitrary restrictions on people's housing, their access to programs, privileges, where they can live or can't live on parole, those kind of things. But all of that takes effort. It takes time to convince them to do something right. I had someone in the department tell me one time that our motto here is to solve no problem before it's time. And in fact, that's the issue. And often it takes, I keep coming back to litigation. You got to sue them when there are bad outcomes. Sometimes that makes them move in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
How you guys doing? You guys all did a great job. A little nervous up here, but a lot of the comments you guys said were very interesting. The gentleman that was speaking in the beginning was talking about the numbers of how much is being spent on our youth to be incarcerated. I mean, I've been counseling with youth and lifers as well for about 5 years now. I know a kid that was facing life for like a $200 crime, and to hear that they're going to spend close to $200,000 on keeping them locked in a box, a lot could have been done. I'm just wondering. I have a nonprofit coming up myself, and I really enjoyed this thing. I just kind of wanted to put it out there for everyone and ask to you guys if there. I heard you guys talking about that there is definitely a problem. Was wondering if there's going to be some kind of open forum where we can talk about solutions and stuff like that, with everyone kind of putting out ideas, because if you guys had something like that, I'd be really interested in contributing or hearing what everyone else is trying to do so we can kind of get something together. That's all. Thank you, guys.
All right, well, I'd love to get your card afterwards and just holler. Like, I'm always trying to build partnerships in the community to see what we can do. We gotta, if we don't step up to the plate, nobody else is. We can't wait on anybody else to do what we need to be doing for ourselves and for our community.
My first involvement with prisons was in Louisiana with the Free Gary Tyler Committee. Gary was 16 years old and was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. And he was on death row for a number of years. He was just released after 41 years from Angola about 2 weeks ago. He was released, and the premise was always that Gary was innocent. and we stuck with that. He was innocent. He was released saying that he was guilty. He had to agree to say he was guilty. And so at age 57, serving 41 years, he was released. My question is, at what price do you pay to come out of the prison system? And how would you respond to what Gary had to do?
You know what, it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because especially when you're dealing with the older brothers who just had a different level of integrity and walk about themselves. So, you know, your word is kind of all you got, right, when you're in that world. And at the same time, your freedom is priceless, right? And so I tell brothers, do what you got to do to come home, because we need you more out here than we need your integrity behind them walls, right? I just encourage brothers, just come home. Let's come home. Let's put our minds together. We know what we up against. It's not a big mystery, you know. Let's come home and let's do what we got to do so we can stop these young ones from headed to the slave ship.
Unfortunately, that seems to be a case for a lot of women also, that they're innocent and they claim that they're innocent. They spend numerous years still in prison. And how do you go to the board when the board wants to hear that you're guilty, that you committed a crime that you did not commit? And it's hard, and just like Troy just said, sometimes you just have to, and I hate to say it this way, but you have to be in compliance and let them hear what they want to hear in order for you to go home. I don't agree with it, but unfortunately, that's how our system is, and hopefully one day we could break the cycle, but it's going to take just a lot of effort, because there's a lot of people left behind those walls who are innocent, but in society's eyes, they're guilty.
It's an impossible process in a lot of ways. Technically, the law prohibits the parole board from requiring someone to admit guilt to anything in order to be released. But as a practical matter, these parole commissioners consider your attitude about the crime. If your attitude is messed up, you will stay in prison. That said, I've had a number of clients released who've always maintained and still do maintain their innocence. Every case is very different. The circumstances that lead to it, the way you show the parole board you're in a different place, regardless of whether you did this crime, changes from one case to the next. So I don't give up, but it's still a very, it's an impossible situation for people to be in. It's very, very difficult.
Hi there, my name is Afomia Tesfaye, and I am with the Human Impact Partners, and for the last 8 months, I have been working with Ella Baker Center to really understand the screening and admissions policies for public housing, and one of the particular areas that we chose was the Oakland Housing Authority in the Oakland area. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to look at the intersection of criminal justice and housing. As we know, housing is a fundamental right and a fundamental factor in helping people to reunite with their family. And so one of the things, while we heard today that OHA does a great job of really helping people to overturn decisions and have mitigating circumstances, we've come out with a number of recommendations around screening policies and having mitigating circumstances be submitted as part of the application process, and also having race be something that is tracked all the way from the beginning to the end, so that we can really understand the disparate impact on people of color, because we know that HUD has come out with some guidelines really talking about how there is a likelihood of individuals from these communities having housing be not something that they are getting. So I'm interested to hear, how do we disseminate this information, and then how do we get in contact with OHA to be able to talk about these changes in screening policies?
Since I'm OHA, I guess I can help you. You need to just call my office if you want to get in contact with us, and we would look at what the recommendations are. I'm not sure we would agree with them, So I'm going to tell you that going in the gate, we do a pretty excellent job, I think, at making sure that our applicants are given all the process that they're not only entitled to, but beyond that. In terms of affecting the change that you want to affect in terms of the larger public housing system, you're talking about HUD, and HUD is a hard nut to crack, and they're hard to move. You know, when I was talking about the notice, that was a little historic on their part. What was more historic to me was the General Counsel then this month coming out with some more guidance, because it's not just the public housing authorities that do the assisted units that we're talking about. There's also the multifamily side, which is done in the private sector. There's 41,000 of those units in Northern California. It's larger than the housing authorities' portfolios. Those are important, so getting the recommendations to HUD. HUD is admitting in that notice, if you haven't read it, that there's a disparate impact on crime based on race. And I think that's an important thing. I don't know what, they would have to put in changes saying, we need to track this, because your housing authorities are not going to track one more thing that they don't need to track at this point, because it's so expensive to administer the program anyway. Sounds easy, but it's really not when you add anything. And then it all has to be uploaded to HUD, and then HUD has to do their work with it. So it's a heavy lift, but I would be interested in hearing it. If you want to call my office, that would be fine.
I just wanted to say, as a practitioner, I've worked with hundreds of guys and women who have recently gotten out of prison. And my role has been in vocational training. I think it's all about jobs and what people are going to do when they get out. Housing, of course, is very important, but I've worked with community colleges and nonprofit organizations. A lot of guys get out of prison and don't have the skills. So I think as funding becomes available within the prisons, it's imperative that there really be money for training and dollars for training when they get out of prison. So the community colleges are doing some of that, but I don't think it's enough. I think there really has to be a strong emphasis on job training. So any thoughts about that?
Well, I fully agree with that. I think one of the things that we're seeing is with some of the recent reforms, Prop 47 is one of the biggest examples, that there are thousands of people who otherwise would be housed at level 1 and 2, especially level 2 prisons, that are not there anymore. What is happening in some of these places, I was at the California Institution for Men a couple of months ago in Chino, and we visited a shop where they were doing some kind of metal fabrication. And the instructor said, hey, this is great, these guys learned these great skills here. And I look around, there are only 5 people working in the shop. I said, well, what's going on? And the yard was, kind of bare. I said, well, what's going on? Because I know personally there are 500 lifers in the yard next to this, where the shop is. And they explained, well, because of classification limitations, those lifers can't come over here. They can't access the programs. And this is, many institutions have the same thing. They have some kind of infrastructure that could provide an opportunity for vocational training and other programs, but they haven't changed the rules so that they give access to the people who really need it.
Right.
I agree it's a problem.
I like to add to that, and I agree with everything that's been said.